Welcome to the Living Wholehearted podcast, where we're helping leaders live with integrity.
Whether you're a mom or a CEO, you're a leader, and how you lead matters.
Welcome to the Living Wholehearted podcast, Jeff. I'm so excited for today because we have a special guest, Rhonda Began.
Yeah.
She's not only a dear friend of ours, but she has been in full-time ministry for many, many years. She's a wise woman. There's a lot of things about you, Rhonda, that we're going to let you share. But what I'm most excited about for today is that we work with so many leaders who run out of the gate strong and are excited and want to finish well. And there is this wall that many hit along the way and end up either struggling with their own inner life, hit a burnout. So we're gonna talk a lot about how to finish well, how to run the race in the long run. Sitting with Rhonda, she's got a lot of experience and expertise here, as well as what it means to be a woman in full-time ministry and a leader. And I am excited. Anything you want to say?
Yeah, Rhonda, we're glad you're here, and you have. We've journeyed together for many years, and it's a privilege to have you here today. And we love you and Mark and your family.
Thanks. I'm excited to be here and chat
tell
with
us
you guys.
all about you.
Well, I am a woman who I'm Canadian. I love being Canadian. Born and raised in northern Canada in a little farming town called Beaver Lodge. I am married to Mark Began, who's also on staff at the church that I work at. And we have two grown daughters. They're 16 months apart, not our plan. My plan was to space them out like that, 2.5 years. But I wouldn't change a thing. And our oldest daughter, they both lead in their own right too. It's so fun to see your grown children lead.
Yeah.
And one's married, has two babies, 2 boys, Landon and Declan, and the other one is single, working, and serving at the church as well. So it's fun to do ministry with your kids. Besides being a pastor, I love things like I love cooking. Cooking is why I love people. So I've cooked for Tara and Jeff, cooked for...
Love your cooking.
Please do that again.
Yeah. It's a decompressor for me. Like some people would say going shopping and preparing a meal, but preparing a meal for me is how to love people. So I love that. I love canning because it makes a memory. I remember canning with my grandparents. And so like making jam or doing that thing really brings me to a place of happy. And I love my garden. I love our house. I love coming out here to the retreat center just to be still with God. So, there's a lot about me.
There is a lot about you. We're going to unpack some of those pieces.
Wonder Woman.
Yeah. What is so great about you, Rhonda, is you're real. You're very real. And I think every woman that I talk to, and man actually, but most women, when they meet you, they just feel so at ease. And they continue to kind of be surprised, I think, because you are a female pastor. There's this expectation or some sort of an idea of what you're supposed to be like. And I love that. You're so real, and you just help put people at ease. So tell us a little bit more about your journey in ministry that you and Mark are in ministry. So tell us where you started. How did you get into that journey?
Well, if I say I started when I was like born, that will maybe take too long. But my parents were people that I went to church right away. And so church was a rhythm for me. My parents both served at church. And so I thought I would always just be a lay person in the church. You saw in scripture that that's what we were supposed to do, serve each other and come alongside each other. And so I also in my small town, the church was very small. And I didn't see women have many opportunities except to do Sunday school. That was permitted. And they could go be a missionary, but neither of those, you couldn't get paid to do ministry. And so I just said to the Lord, well, I won't be a pastor because nobody's going to pay me. And I'm not going to marry a pastor because who would want me as a pastor's wife? I'm loud and I don't wear a floral print dress and I don't play the organ. Those were the things that the people that I saw in this little town, that's who they were. And I was so loud, and who's gonna, So at 18, I was be a volunteer in the church, and that was great. So I went to university was serving in my church in the youth ministry. We hired a fellow named Rhonda Began to be our youth pastor. And I tell people I fell in love with his philosophy of ministry. And that's actually really true because Mark had such a passion for youth. Okay. He believed they could serve and they could be part of the church, even in middle school, high school. And that just resonated with me. He also was the first man that I had dated that actually led me spiritually. Most of the time, because I had walked so closely with the Lord, I would often overshadow my date or my boyfriend. And so I came in knowing Mark's passion. And so I was just going to be a pastor's wife, which I knew God was laughing about. And I was just going to serve in the church as I always had. And then about 4 years into our marriage, we were here in Portland, and we knew we needed me to get a half-time job. And so I thought, well, there's this job at the church, but I don't know. And it's encouraging people to serve. I can do that part-time till I'll go be a teacher, which was my training. And then as I was wrapping that up, I think I'd done that for 4 years, part-time, full-time. And I never really saw it as being a pastor. I just saw it as being encouraging volunteers and helping the nursery. That's when Faith Carter, our women's pastor at the time, said, would you consider stepping into my position? I'm heading off to do a different position in the church. And I literally, my jaw dropped because I thought, oh, no. And I always say the first person to do women's ministry at our church was this beautiful English lady. And so I said, you had Queen Elizabeth. and then Faith Carter, just like she set a beautiful table, and she just was, and so like, oh, you have Martha Stewart. And that was, when Martha Stewart was cool and hip, and we all wanted to be
right.
We all wanted to be Martha Stewart.
It was the early Martha Stewart.
That's right.
Yes.
Exactly.
Right.
And then for those of you listening, I was like, you want Carol Burnett? Because
you want Carol Burnett.
Because she had this heart of gold. She was quirky.
True.
She was funny.
I love it.
And she had some weird talents. But so when I thought through that, and what I loved is my husband's like, honey, you're gifted for ministry. You do it. And I think we'll talk more about that later, just the encouragement of men in my life who've helped me with that. But so I stepped into women's ministries with immense insecurity. I mean, I may have appeared confident, but I did not feel I knew what I was doing. And so I just thought, well, I'll do it like I've always done. I'll just be on my knees before the Lord, and he'll show me. And they'll figure out 2 years from now, I don't know what I'm doing, and they'll find a way to phase me out. And so I'll only have to do it for a couple of years, and I can be dead.
You had an exit strategy before you started.
I did.
Yeah.
I did. They're going to see I'm an imposter. But 20 years later, it's been one of the most significant growth areas of my life. And I can't imagine doing something else. I mean, I can imagine retiring, and I can imagine being a grandma and stuff, but and it's an amazing role to play when God puts you there, and then you have to navigate through that long-term pieces of ministry. So that's kind of my journey into ministry. I'm shocked and pleased and blessed and excited.
It's so fun because you do have this like idea of what the role requires, and God is so fun because He already knew that's where He was putting you, and He made you and equipped you for this. But so often we think, oh, it's not me, it's that. And I love that about our God, and your story is so profound that way. I want you to tell us a little bit about the season in your life when you hit the wall, because every leader eventually has kind of a dark place where they're just kind of questioning and spinning, and some make it and some don't. Tell us about when you hit that wall. What was that like for you in that season?
So I was thinking about this question earlier, and I think there are rhythms of hitting walls. So I could tell you in year 4 when I hit the wall, in year 8 when I hit the wall, and I began to see a pattern of 4 years, by the way. I think one of the times where I really hit the wall, probably the most significant time, was a time where 2 years before, there'd been a lot of disappointment and just running hard, doing ministry. people around me who were part of my team were hurting. And so I was picking up slack because I loved them. And I could see, and that takes a toll on my heart. I'm a person who really cares for people. And so I always want to come alongside them. But I did that for a span of 2 years, and it completely depleted me. Before this, I'd been in a really great rhythm of spending time with God each month and being still before Him once a month, doing stillness every day, silence and solitude. And in the coping with what needed to be handled, I let that go.
Easy to do.
Yeah. And I think it's a common thing. I think I've heard it called the tyranny of the urgent. And we let go the very thing that gives us life to do the things that are draining us of life. And so if you keep up with that for too long, then you smack, because you're running and suddenly you can't do anymore. You smack right into that wall. And I remember this time. In fact, you had spoken at a retreat of ours, and I think it was the beautiful mess. And I remember coming into your room, and because it was at the end of your kind of times meeting with women, and I said, so I've gone through this really difficult 2 years. Can I just watch a sad movie and cry and let that be done? She said, no, you can't. And then what was great about you is you just set up, here's some things that I think would be helpful. And then in meeting with you and with different people, processing through that, and then taking some healthy steps back and reorienting my life back to what was life-giving. So making time. So that hitting that wall, you're so exhausted. I call it devastatingly tired, from Ruth Haley Barton.
Yes.
She, and in ministry, we do it all the time where we're so depleted, and then we can't. It seems like we can't get back, but we can.
We can, but that intentionality, and I love that you're pointing out the fact that you needed other people to remind you of that as well.
And to hold me accountable.
And to hold you accountable. But the tyranny of the urgent, that is, and the doing and the taking on of other people's things and their stuff and their hurts, very normal, male or female. That is a common struggle. So the good news is that you don't have to be stuck there. Or the fact that you're still in ministry. Yeah. So when you look back, what are the principles that you've learned that you would want to pass on to others? Is there a way to avoid that?
No. Is there a way to avoid it?
Inquiring minds want to know.
Yeah, by inquiring minds.
I think it's a natural tendency. I think our natural tendency is to do more, because that's success, right? Especially if you get accolades for it, if you get praise for it. So I feel like if you preset your rhythms and you make time for your rhythms, you're less likely to head there. In the saying yes to too many things. I still really wrestle with that. And so,
me too, Rhonda.
I know. Being able to say, okay, here's my schedule, and these are the times I have. But outside of these things, I can't say yes. Or I have to, like, another tip for me is I always make sure I check with Mark. Okay, here's our calendar. Always. I just said always. No, I check with Mark.
We should check with Mark.
He's going to he'll be listening to this.
Yeah, and he'll say, no, she doesn't. I think especially in ministry, setting aside rhythms of being with God with no agenda and with no planning, so that you're just sitting with Jesus, talking to Him, asking Him, remind me of my identity, who I am in you. To me, that's vitally important. Taking a Sabbath day. In ministry, Sunday can't be our Sabbath day. I mean, we all work. And some people say, I can't take a full day. What if taking 2 half days? When are you least productive in taking that and not, and then how do you structure that? What are you going to do? No technology. No, how will you? Subversive Sabbath by Swoboda was really helpful for me in that. Just rethinking Sabbath. Do the things you love. Like I love cooking. And so some people will look at it and say, like that's, I have a cousin who talks about pink jobs and blue jobs.
Okay.
And so, that's a pink job, and they joke back and forth. They both live in good places in their marriage, but cooking isn't a pink job for me. Cooking is a life-giving practice. And so, and then spending time with the people who really fill you up and having the other thing is I would say have a good circle of people that's an inner circle. And in that inner circle, when you meet with them, they should build your faith. But when you leave after talking with them, you should feel like elevated versus further down.
So and noticing what you actually feel actually in your body, in your mind.
Exactly.
When you're engaging in these rhythms is a key thing for you.
Yes.
And that's something that we're trying to teach people how to do and to notice. I love that you practice that.
Yeah. Well, and it's something that I think from even both you guys have done sessions with our staff where you have helped us understand who we are. Where are we personality-wise? So it gives me actually some permission to not try and be all things to all people.
You know your limits.
Yeah. Well, I'm learning my
accepted.
limits. Yeah.
You're starting to accept them too.
And part of mine, like where I fall, you guys do CVI and you've taught that to us. I'm a really high merchant. And so people feed me. And so to tell me to go away and not be away from people sometimes is punishment, or to not be excited about things or to weigh myself down. So I just I'm learning to let myself be who God created me to be.
I love that statement, you're learning. Again, there's this undertone, I think, I would say in the church, but maybe even beyond the church walls, that there's a point when you arrive. And I think as a clinician working with leaders, God has just continued to show me that this journey is forever until we meet him face to face in heaven, that there's this letting go of that idea that you finally arrive. If we could just do A plus B equals C, there's this ongoing process of rhythms, you call them. I think one thing, Rhonda, you were saying about with people, I always it helps me to categorize a little bit. This might sound really bad, but there's the takers, there's the givers, and then the taken givers. So I know those relationships where it's a give and take, and it's a mutual benefit. And then I have the relationships where I'm just to receive,
right?
Where I and my tendency would want to be to give back, but I have to work really hard just to say receive, that practice. And then there are the relationships that I know I'm just giving and they're taking, and that's what they are. Those are my ministry. They're not meant to be my friends or my peers, and they're not meant to be my mentors. And so that piece can help in what are my expectations or what is God showing me about each of those relationships. And if all my relationships are where I'm giving, that's a problem.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
That's a problem. And so that is a struggle, I think, for those of us leaders types where we find ourselves always giving.
And especially leader types in the church, right? Because giving is the way of Jesus.
Right.
Yes.
Well, he also received. He also made food and enjoyed food and presented it to others. He was the one around the campfire that had the fish, and he called his disciples to him, and they had breakfast. And so there's giving and receiving, and it's easier to give and to be in that giving position than it is to receive, actually. And particularly for those of us that are in ministry, it's comfortable. It can be a place to hide even in the giving, right?
Absolutely.
And knowing yourself and what's happening in your body and what gives you life and what you feel is an important attunement that both men, particularly men, need to work on. And I think, women, you have a leg up and generally in attunement to your bodies because of just body things. But I know for me that it wasn't until maybe, 8 years ago, perhaps, that 8 to 10 years ago, and rough timeline there, where I first began to notice more about what was happening in my body. Like when I got anxious, where did that show up? Well, it showed up in my jaw, or my hands. And it's so cool to hear you talk about what that's like to integrate and to be thinking about that in your rhythms.
Well, Rhonda, tell us a little bit more about the things you've learned as a woman, particularly in ministry. As a female leader, developing other women, are there themes or patterns or just consistent common struggles that you're seeing in the church when it comes to women in leadership?
I'm going to back up just to give you my history, because I do think who we had around us as a child, how we were championed, or were we championed, makes a big difference. Yeah. And so I grew up with a mom and a dad who delighted in me, a very healthy childhood. My dad, although he was not a strong, overpowering, he was very kind and gentle, he was a you go kid, you go. And so it was one of those things where my own dad really said, there was no limits to what I could do. And then my mom was somebody who was always challenging herself and learning. And so she would, I think I'll go take a course at the college and learn how to man a suicide hotline. Just always thinking, I think I'll learn to paint. I think so. I had great models in both parents that set me up. And I think that frame for me in ministry and life, there's nothing I can't do if I want to do it.
That's incredible.
If God's called me to it. And not everybody has that. And so I bring that into ministry at wherever I am, but especially at church. So I expect the men around me will be that way. And my husband is that way. He's always the first one saying, you can do this, you're gifted. And I look at him, because we happen to work at the same church, I look at him and he's doing it with the women around him as well. So it's not just me, but it's men, and men and women. It's not just women, but just he's challenging, be what God has created you to be. So with that framework, that's how I enter ministry. There's nothing we can't do, because we do it together. So I've worked alongside Jeff, I've worked alongside Tara, and I've never thought, oh gosh, Jeff, you're a guy, and I'm a girl, and gosh, we have pink and blue jobs.
Yeah.
There's no pink and blue jobs. But what's Jeff's giftedness? What's my giftedness? And how can we work together? Yeah. So I think when I approach women in ministry, one of the things I say to them is, what has God gifted you in? And if God's gifting you that, how can you utilize that for his kingdom in the best way? So I'm not thinking with a ceiling of, are you allowed to, or are you permitted to? And every church has a governance. Every church has that. So there are certain criteria for a church, but live up to that criteria. So there's lots of things we can do within the body. So for me in coaching, one of the first things when I meet somebody or I spend time with somebody, I will say, what floats your boat? So if you could do anything, what do you want to do? Because more than likely, there's a job in the church that we can find for you to do. And so I'll hear women say, I love people, or I love numbers, or I love logistics, and then I'm not just thinking, where can I plug them in women's ministry? I'm like, where can we use them in the body of Christ? Yeah. This ministry over here really needs somebody who can do data entry and handle like project management. Let's put that person there. And so often I'll liaise within our church body to, hey, have you thought of using this person? And sometimes you have to give them a bigger picture because they maybe in their upbringing or in the way they've done it, they have kind of thought, oh, I wouldn't have thought of asking a man or a woman to do that. So I think the same way with men with maybe doing spiritual shepherding. We often think, oh, we'll have a woman pray, or in a circle. We'll have a man pray in a circle. Don't limit yourself to gender in those things. Yeah. Think about who is going to be the best person to represent in that situation. So I think those are some of the challenges, and I'm sure there's more questions there, but.
Well, this is a natural intersection. I mean, you mentioned speaking to people's gifts, speaking to who they are, what they are wired to contribute, and how God made them to contribute to his church, and to the world, wherever they go. And that comes straight from Ephesians 4. It's not the only place where gifts are talked about, but this was like a huge, just being a guy, and particularly being a person that's been in ministry most of my life as well. this was one of those pieces that I think that it was lost for me, but it's lost for a lot of people. And I remember going to our mutual pastor, Bill, who leads our church, and talking with him about this, as we were wrestling for quite some time as an organization, as leadership, as to what to do about this title of pastor. And our church, our history didn't have a history of men and women both being pastors. This was a big barrier breakdown. And when we got to the point and looking at the scriptures, and I remember asking Bill, who might trust? He's a trustworthy leader and not someone who just willy-nilly moves where people want or are trying to influence him to move. He loves the word. He loves the Lord. We've watched him for decades. And I remember him just saying, for me, it boils down to this. We have a lot of conversation, a lot of dialogue, a lot of communications with other churches. We've examined the word. We've looked at the original languages. We've done all these things. It boils down to this. Paul, when he wrote Ephesians and he talked about these gifts, there is no gender in these gifts. There was no assignment for gender, for who could be this or who could be that, and it's just like a switch went off in my mind. It's like, if that's not there, why have we made it such a big deal? Why is it that we go to those places and try to create these constructs? Those constructs, as it relates to the gifts that churches traditionally have made over time, are constructs that are man-made. And the construct of the scriptures, as it relates there, we cannot say that the gender element is assigned to men for these specific roles or this or that. It's not. And that was huge for me. I know that that's really controversial, but it's either there or it's not. And for so long, I didn't understand or know that. And so I'm still transitioning with that word in my mind, but in my heart, I've always felt and known that God is the assigner of gifts to His children, and in His nature, both male and female. It's incredible, and have always held that. Just didn't know how it is that we had these constructs and where they came from, and so I just appreciate the fact that you look at a person and you see what floats your boat, and that's what I think God does with His kids. What floats your boat? And He's a good father, as we understand the scriptures. He identifies Himself as such, and He loves to give good gifts to His kids, and He has a purpose for each one of us, unique. It's incredible, and that is when it's seen in others, especially the others who've been doing this for a while, that you're still, you have these rhythms that you're trying to practice what you preach, that it's not that you've ever arrived, but you're learning and you're inquisitive and curious and you're using the gifts that God gave you. It's supported by others in that process. You model a vulnerability that other young leaders need to know that's a way to make this sustainable. Whether you're a man or a woman in leadership, you have to have these things. This is wisdom. And so thank you for being like that, Rhonda.
Thank you.
Well, Rhonda, we're going to wrap up this first episode. Is there any last comments you want to make in terms of just your own journey in ministry, the things that you've learned in helping other women along the way, anything particular that men have done or haven't done that would be important for us to comment on before we close?
I think what comes to mind is often it's the simple things that hook us up. So, for example, you're maybe a male leader in the church and you're doing training and it's couples, so you're meeting with the husband of the couple and you're doing all the training, assuming that husband will then meet with his wife and deconstruct that training. And I always say that's very short-sighted because everybody needs to hear the training from the trainer. So when we're doing training with people, I think we need to create a time where everybody can be at the training, or maybe we record the training, or how do we disseminate that information so everybody can hear? Because it's kind of like the telephone, when you would speak in the can, and what did you hear? And nobody unpacks it the same way. So I would say that's probably, when I think of one of the ways we as pastors or ministry leaders probably fall short, is I'm explaining it to one half of an equation, if it's a couple, or I'm not creating a place where both men and women can come and get trained. And so, and then allowing leadership. So the second thing would be, Jesus called his disciples, they were fishermen. So that's what they were good at. But Jesus didn't, he saw more there. So he would train them. He would show them, then he would let them practice. He would come back and talk to them. Then he would send them out on his own. And I think that's such a great pattern. So I think that idea of teaching people to swim, building their strength so that they can tread water, not letting them drown or feel like they're drowning, but when they start to feel that way, okay, float for a minute, but continuing to teach them ministry in the areas they haven't known, but you see gifting in. Those would be the two things, I think, that come to mind.
Love that. If you are interested in learning more about who Rhonda is, you can check out rollinghills.org or go to theencouragegathering.com and find out a little bit more there. She's one of our key speakers. She's going to be doing an amazing drama as well, so you won't want to miss that. Look forward to the next episode where we're going to unpack a little bit more what it means to mother adult children, a little bit more about the needs of women in the church, and continue to talk about the role of women in leadership. Thank you for joining us in being a leader committed to shrinking the integrity gap between the values we espouse and the values we actually live out in practice.